following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana Kersner, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This week, we're going to talk about how, well, sensational title, but it is actually true, I think, how over-explaining can ruin your life. How over-explaining might be ruining your life. A lot of listeners might feel called out by this show because I'm doing it because there's been a lot of over-explaining going around in my life right now. But hey, better you hear it here and make corrections than keep giving people the impression that your emotions and impressions are very, very important, but other people's don't matter nearly as much. That's the biggest risk I find comes with chronic over-explaining. Everybody has their reasons, and they're valid reasons. But I've had two recent experiences, both coincidentally with younger women, that sort of Gen Z cohort. I don't want to dunk on Gen Z because people of all ages can do this. But these two women, they were gonna unleash a trauma dump no matter what anyone else thought about it. It didn't do anything good for either of them. And in fact, it left the other people involved with a more negative opinion of them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me give you some examples of over-explaining based on my recent experiences. The first was a situation one of my facilitators escalated to me where someone approached him directly and asked if he wanted to get into the details of why she felt so sorry about a very minor thing that had happened. And the facilitator said he didn't need her to be sorry. He needed her to try to listen and understand why she was getting the responses she did. Now, based on the theme of the show, you can probably guess what came next. This well-meaning person agreed, then proceeded to trauma dump anyway, with a lengthy treatise on why what she did was terrible after she was told it wasn't, and how sorry she was after being told that the facilitator wasn't looking for an apology. While the person in question, she was trying really, really hard, what she ended up communicating was that she wasn't listening because she was all wound up to explain. Now, it's fairly easy to see from a place of rational distance how that sort of bad habit is going to get you into trouble in professional and personal relationships. But these responses are ingrained from childhood. Some people are compelled to do them, even though it doesn't get them a good response and it creates more trouble than it solved. Here's another example. This one happened to me personally. Someone recently got very unhappy with me because my email responses were too short for her liking. And it's true. It's rare I see the point in an email that's more than 4 to 5 sentences long. I think a longer conversation is better had via voice or Zoom call or something like that. But this person determined that, no, it wasn't that I just keep my messages short. I was coming across as passive-aggressive. Now, she checked herself momentarily and said, I may be wrong about that, but... and then launched into a lengthy diatribe about how terrible my suspected passive aggression was, which completely wiped out the preceding I may be wrong. It's amazing how often this happens. For God's sakes, if there's a chance you're wrong, stop. Find out before you say things you can't take back like the person in this example did. Now, I get it. It's anxiety, right? And like I said, these sorts of anxiety-driven responses get attributed to Gen Z a lot. And okay, maybe it's more common in that demographic, but again, I've found people in all age brackets who behave this way. And I'm not talking about neurodivergent info dumping. Neurodivergent info dumping and this sort of over-explaining based on panic and anxiety, they get lumped in together in articles about this stuff, but they have completely different characteristics. For one, every autistic person I know is hyper aware that they can overtalk, right? Part of the reason I keep my emails short is I was told, yeah, your emails are too long. People aren't reading them. You're putting too much in emails. Okay. This panic response I'm talking about, the over-explaining, you get that and saying, okay, slow down, I get it. 9 times out of 10, the person will go faster and get frustrated with you. Okay. They're not the same thing. And I am fed up to hear with neurodivergency getting mixed in with mental illness. They're not the same thing, okay? Now, this over-explaining, the actual over-explaining, not the info dumping, the panic response, is, according to some experts, a defense mechanism and a stress response that came from trying to appease a parent or caregiver in early life. According to these experts, children raised in these environments don't develop balanced information and social processing abilities. And so they'll interpret mildly stressful or even neutral responses as threatening. The ensuing stress response tanks their ability to concentrate and process information, and over-explaining becomes a self-soothing behavior against the feeling of not being believed or understood. And I've found personally in my work, it's not just families that had a lot of yelling. Though a lot of clients that are working on over-explaining come from families with a lot of yelling. There were also families that were checked out because of a divorce or other life crisis, and their kids felt the need to just protect the parents from their own problems. And so any even remotely neutral, disinterested response from parents just built and built and built. Now, of course, the person who accused me of passive aggression, well, she didn't stop there. No, you saw the self-soothing earlier in the communications, and it was like I'd send her 4 sentences. She'd send me 3 lengthy emails, okay? So self-soothing wasn't working. So she went into the "it's not me, it's you" mode, intent on finding something wrong with my responses to balance out her apparent terror of having done something wrong. In that particular case, what was the issue? People are like, give me more detail. I don't like to spill the tea on these, but in this case, it was a conversation that basically she needed to make a decision. I couldn't make it for her. I kept kicking it back to her. Let me know when you've made a decision. And instead of just making the choice, she spun and spun and spun until she overheated. What she interpreted as passive aggression was just me reiterating that the choice had to be her choice. And she seemed to get more and more frustrated and frightened at something. And these are the moments in a conversation where it's like you've got a front row seat to see how somebody's, important people in their lives, parents or other sort of authority figure, how they talk to this person. And these methods of communication tend to be harsh, blame-ridden, unhelpfully flattered aggressive, and ironically, passive-aggressive. This woman referred to emails as nuanced grunts. Yes, text was me grunting. See, that wasn't about me. And I'm sure she wasn't intending to be harsh, blame-ridden, and unhelpfully aggressive or passive-aggressive, right? It doesn't feel harsh, blame-ridden, or unhelpfully aggressive to the people that are doing it. It feels, well, a lot of the time, the big problem is someone in this state can't identify and name what they're feeling other than bad. Shame over feelings of fear and anger and embarrassment mean that they can't center themselves in their own experience. And so things get really big, really fast. So part of it is nervous system, sure. Another part is a cognitive story that's being told. Now, those who study happiness have found that the ability to identify and process negative emotions is strongly linked to greater life satisfaction. So if you're trying to outrun bad feelings with the words of a kind, it's not my fault, it's your fault. You are, and I say this with all the caring in the world, that's why I'm doing this show. You are wrecking your own life with this stuff. Even if you don't actively lay blame, especially of the I could be wrong, but variety that I got, you might still be coming across in ways that make the people around you feel not valued. Another, Gen Zism, sorry, Gen Z, I've observed is, and every generation has their way of talking, okay? This is just, I've seen sort of this, Gen Z has been taught to talk this way, and it's not their fault. Maybe it came from their parents, but the Gen Zism is, I'm not saying you intended this, or I'm not saying this is in any way your fault, followed by a but and a heavy dose of misery. Now think about that for a moment, okay? If the person doesn't intend it, or it's not their fault, what's with the misery dump, okay? Is that the appropriate time to unload really heavy feelings on them like that? Because if they don't intend to do it, are you sure it's coming from them? Is this work you should be doing that you're offloading onto the other person? Even if you don't intend to, even if it's not your fault, right? We've taught younger adults to start in the wrong place. Okay, all this therapy speak that's infected our day-to-day language, right? It's much better to just say how you're feeling. Like, look, that caught me off guard. I need a minute. Or that reminded me of something that you couldn't possibly know about. Give me a minute, right? It's much better to just say that than prefacing this, oh my God, I feel so terrible, with, you didn't mean to, but I'm totally going to talk like you did, right? If you don't think the person meant to, not even a little, what exactly are you trying to communicate with the 6,000 words of misery? Okay. Maybe say what you're trying to do, what your intentions are off the top, and then stop. Like, look, I need some support here. I just had a bad memory. Something like that. Real simple, okay? Your friends are not your therapist. Your coworkers certainly aren't. And you're going to get a much better reaction from them if you strip out that, I'm not saying it's your fault, backdoor blame. Because if you really think someone contributed to your unhappiness in some way, say so, right? Just come right out there. Like, that red is a shot. I don't think that's fair. I say that to people who may not have intended to be nasty, but hit the button. I don't think that's fair. And I'm prepared to back it up, right? I'm prepared to be wrong if I just make a blunt claim like that. And if I'm wrong, I'm going to have to own it and make it right. But if you are actually setting and enforcing your boundaries, don't do I'm sure you didn't mean to, but this totally is not your fault. But I've had people do that. This totally is not your fault. But after you said that, I cried for hours. Okay, you cried for hours over something I said, but it totally wasn't my fault. That's just BS, okay? Top 10 phrase. Other people don't have to like your boundaries, but they do have to respect them. If you don't want to hear something, just be blunt, okay? Because what you're doing with the over-explaining is perpetuating that cycle of blame and judgment and appeasement that caused you to over-explain in the first place. Over-explaining your misery is communicating that you expect the people around you to somehow fix your problem for you. And often that's not possible because the real root of the problem is that hyperactive stress response over neutral to slightly negative communications. Because really, if I was being passive aggressive and trying to needle that person, I wasn't. But let's assume I was, okay? If I was, they gave me exactly what someone being passive aggressive would be looking for, didn't they? They exploded, they made a bunch of unprovable accusations, and even acknowledged that they could be wrong, but just charged forward anyway. That's not a recipe for success. Someone being passive aggressive is a them problem, not a you problem. Until they come out and clearly say what their issue is, they can keep on sulking, right? They're allowed their negative feelings, because if you reward the passive aggression with a response, well, you're just encouraging them to keep doing it. And if perceived passive aggression sends you into panic overdrive, you may want to consider therapy for potential childhood neglect. Again, I say this because I really do want better for people. Like I say all the time on this show, I am not a therapist, but I can give you some suggestions for avoiding over-explaining and getting the bottom of what's triggering it. And we'll start that after the break, after a very lengthy opening. Do you have a story you think would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At Not Therapy Show on socials, how over-explaining is ruining your life, and how to get more balance when we come back on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about over-explaining, how it's ruining your life and how to get better balance. Now, as we discussed before the break, we're not talking about neurodivergent info dumping. This is something different. A lot of neurodivergent people do have anxiety, and they also have shame, embarrassment, and a fear of things spiraling out of control, but neurodivergency is its own thing. You can have both. We're talking about the over-explaining rooted in shame, embarrassment, and a fear of things spiraling out of control, not really liking Avatar: The Last Airbender, okay? The problem is the spiraling out of control that you're afraid of. They spiraled out of control with a person from the past who is not the person you're dealing with in the present. So that person in the present, they have no idea what you're on, okay? Just real talk. Think about it. There's a ton of emotional stuff going on inside you in those moments that no other person is privy to but you. People cannot read your mind. No, they really can't. So if you start talking to this person right in front of you, like some horrible bully from your past that needs to be placated or they're going to hurt you, the person you're talking to in the present is not going to know what the heck's going on. That is, in fact, how it's coming across when you over-explain that way. That the other person is some horrible bully that you need to defend yourself against. You know? Well, when you're not saying that people have no right to be angry at you through the back door, right? That's another thing that over-explaining can do. Or, you know, it can come across as explaining instead of apologizing and actually finding out what it's going to take to make it right. And obviously, none of these interpretive options are good. And right now, you might wanting to be explaining to me why I'm wrong about all this. Like, no, that's not why I'm doing it. Let me explain. This is your first chance to do things differently, okay? We're going to learn here together. First of all, okay, you think I'm wrong. I'm just someone on the radio or a podcast, right? Why is it so upsetting to you? People are allowed to be wrong. It isn't that big a deal. If you think people being wrong about you is some sort of threat to you, that's the beginning of understanding your issue with over-explaining. Okay, and I say this as some people make up wild stuff about me all the time. Woo, rumors, right? I know it's not true. Hear me out, okay? Say you think somebody's wrong about you. Would you like someone to jump on you every time you made a mistake? Okay, what do you think it looks like when you leap to correct someone because you're convinced they're wrong about you, right? It's jumping on them for making a mistake, right? That's how it can come across. That's the difference between explaining and over-explaining, or at least one of them. Explaining, well, it can wait a few minutes. Over-explaining is this all-consuming thing that you must do before you're capable of listening, because it is the crest of the wave of an internal freakout. And there's a reason I say, top 10 phrase, listen twice before you talk once. If you're in that freakout state, you're in a state where you're not capable of listening. And trust me, you are going to get more wrong than you get right in those states. You are going to jump to conclusions. You are going to catastrophize. That is a time where not speaking is better. The best idea when you're in that state is take a bit to recenter, get to the point where you can effectively listen as well as talk. Because here's the thing. If you really believe the person that you need to explain to is a threat, there's something seriously wrong with that relationship, and maybe you should get out of it. But if you think all people are threats, well, there's some work that can be done there, okay? Because most people aren't out to get you. Most people are just trying to get by day to day. So assuming that this is some direct attack on you in your response is just going to seem bad, crazy. Someone with a PTSD diagnosis, me right here, trust me. Yeah. But you're going, no, I'm not. No, yeah. Yeah, no, you are. I'm sorry. You are. If you must explain to diffuse the threat, then you're treating that person like a threat. And a person just minding their own business and trying to solve a problem, or just going, what did I say? Those people are allowed to have thoughts and feelings about you treating them like a threat. Oh, but their thoughts and feelings are the threat. Now think about that statement. What that statement is saying in real terms, that, oh, their thoughts and feelings are what threaten me. That's saying no one is allowed to have negative feelings about you without you thinking they're going to harm you. And if you keep acting from that place, I guarantee you, people are going to eventually start thinking that you don't like them or don't care about them because you're treating their feelings, you're treating their discomfort, as a threat to destroy instead of just something that does happen. You're asking somebody to listen to your lengthy explanation about how bad things are for you, but they're not allowed to have any negative emotions around you. Do you see the issue here? Okay? Now, okay, I understand it's hard to sit there waiting for criticism that you're expecting because either that's how you grew up or that's what the history of the relationship has been. Trust me, I get it. But imagine what it's like for the other person to get treated like they're attacking you when they haven't. That's what happens when you try to explain away a potential threat. Who happens to be the other person? But it's not that. The explanations start again, right? See, this is why you can't listen. You're arguing with an audio recording right now, okay? Your reactions here, it really isn't about me. This is about an inability to admit that you're not arguing. Oh, sorry. I know you're not arguing. That you're debating. Oh, no, sorry, you're not debating. That's too strong. If you're trying to defend yourself against something the other person didn't actually say, but what they said made you think the thing you're explaining, well, if it's not a direct connection, that person can absolutely not follow you there. Now, would you like to talk to someone who went on tangents you couldn't follow, and then who responded to your confusion if it was yet another threat? Well, if the answer is no, then maybe changing the way you do things is in order, because that's how you're likely coming across to the people around you. And some of you will claim Yes, you would like to deal with someone who went on tangents and treated your confusion as a threat. No, I'm serious. People have done this, like, because then their idea is, right, you can have a conversation and work that out. Now, unfortunately, that theory is based on an ideal conversation. And that ideal conversation is that the person admits they jumped topics and misjudge your confusion. And there's the catch. You can only expect that from other people if you're willing and able to do it yourself. And most chronic over-explainers can't do that very thing. They're feeling too vulnerable. They're feeling too panicked. They have to defend against somebody's going to get me if I admit a mistake. Even if you do say, I'm sorry, like one of the examples I used off the top, the admission of error, the apology gets undone because some explanation follows that makes it sound like, well, you had no choice but to make the mistake, right? I had no other choice, right? And who was forcing you? Who? The person you're talking to. Which is once again treating them like some terrible bully. Expect them to act accordingly. If they're a bully, well, if they're not a bully, most people don't like bullies. Now, hopefully, some of you will see the problem with the structure by now. The conversations I've described are very one-sided, since they're structured on the idea that one person will explain and the problem will just go away. The thinking is not, problems get solved by a give and take, a back and forth. It's not one person doing all the explaining and the other person doing all the listening. Oh, but you don't mean to do that. You can explain what you're really meaning to do. Well, guess what? The other person probably didn't mean to either. But they're still stuck hearing your frantic, emotionally intense explanation of how god-awful this all is for you. But I don't mean to. If you're responding from a place of panic, things are going to seem dire. No matter how many times you say, I'm not saying it's your fault, it's not that big a deal, but no matter how many of those BS wrappers you put on the core message, if you are freaking out, that is going to cut through any preface you put on it. There's no getting around that. So what do you do? How do you deal with panic if not over-explaining? I'll get to that after the break. The pause will help you practice your patience. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website, at nottherapyshow on socials. We'll be back with how over-explaining is wrecking your relationships and what you can do differently on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about how over-explaining is possibly wrecking your relationships. Before the break, I promised to discuss how to deal with panic in a way that doesn't involve over-explaining. And see, I'm going to do it now. So there's no need to panic. This is the thing. If you trust people to do what they say they're going to do, most of the time they will. And if they don't, that's information, right? Now, the first step to dealing with panic without making a bigger mess of things is, this is going to sound weird, realize you're panicking. Now, most people are like, yeah, okay, but that's easier said than done if you struggle with negative emotions because you think they're weakness. Everyone feels all the emotions in the spectrum. Happy, embarrassed, but then angry, afraid. Oh no, fear's bad, anger's bad, right? We put a social charge on those two, right? Panic. Oh God, that's cowardice. No. You have to stop putting that story on it. Name your emotions. Are you panicking? Yes, no. The next step is to ask yourself if you're panicking because of what's happening or if you're panicking because of what you think might happen. And realize that if it's about what might happen, the other person isn't going to be able to understand that that's what you're responding to, and explaining it risks offending them because you're letting them know that you're assuming they're going to do something terrible that they haven't done. You have to accept that you're reacting to something that isn't presently happening anywhere but your own mind. Sure, there's a chance it might happen, but it isn't happening right now. And the best way to keep things on an even keel is to slow things down and reduce the number of assumptions you make, which means speaking or writing in smaller pieces. None of this, if I've misunderstood you, I'm sorry, but if I haven't, answer out how terrible it is. None of that nonsense, okay? If you realize you aren't sure about something, stop and find out the answer before continuing. You're not a helpless little kid anymore. You're an adult. Show up as one. Again, not the same as neurodivergent infodumping, because neurodivergent people are very aware they infodump and they are waiting to be told to stop, right? Sometimes to the point of oversensitivity. But someone over-explaining from panic tends not to react well to being asked to stop or slow down, even though, yes, logically, it is the best thing for the situation. Which is why, if you're an over-explainer, this might be hard to hear, but the responsibility is on you to slow down and give less information at once. At least put the work in, instead of just explaining at length why you need to give so much information. That's making the problem worse instead of better. You have to accept that you're over-explaining. No one can do that for you. If you don't accept that you're over-explaining, the gentle, reminders of someone like you're doing it are just going to feel like another attack. No one can do this for you. No one is torturing you or deliberately misunderstanding you for asking you to slow down or say less. Once you understand that you are over-explaining, try to figure out why in a sentence or two. Don't tell a story. Name the feeling. This is important because over-explaining can be a form of over-intellectualizing, which distances you from your real central emotional experience. And it can prevent you from processing your feelings in a healthy way. Now, not having to deal with your feelings may sound like a good thing. And you know what? It's a survival skill in small to moderate doses. We can do it for a reason, right? Getting through a bad time when you can't afford to break down. But if that intellectualizing becomes chronic, if it becomes your go-to, it can lead to a lot of repressed or projected emotions. And it's those projected emotions that are going to really wreck your over-explained relationships. Especially when you're accusing people of you passive aggression and all that stuff, right? Nobody likes hearing they're making you miserable. And telling them they're doing it totally unintentionally, that can make it worse, okay? No, hear me out. It can. Because if someone's aware of what they're doing, they can stop. If you're getting extremely upset because of a connection you made to what they said that they had no idea about it, right? That's a very helpless feeling. If you're overusing the "I'm not saying this is your fault" tactic, people are going to stop believing you. Because if it's not their fault, why are they hearing about it at length? What you're telling them in practical terms, in outcomes-driven thinking, is their presence is an irritant to you. And they can't stop the irritation from happening again because you're making associations. Things are going on in your head that there's absolutely no way for them to predict. They just reset the clock until the next failure in this instance. And let's face it, with the people who, I'm not saying it's your fault, but I cried for hours after you sent me that text. Like, I will go right out and say that right there is a load of bull. The crying one was a response to the text. If you really don't think it's the other person's fault, don't tell them about the crying for hours. All right? Keep that to yourself. I'm not saying your fault, I'm not saying it's your fault, but that's just not owning that you really wanted the person to know they quote unquote made you cry. Here's the problem, okay? Crying for hours after a single text might, just saying, be a you problem. That's a very strong response to a written message with a character limit. At some point, real talk here, and I say this as somebody who went through it, you have to decide whether to continue to make your trauma the most important relationship in your life. If you don't want that, you have to make changes. And a lot of people understand this in theory, but they still have the remaining compulsion to explain. And so I hear, when do I get to explain? When does a person you just backdoor accused of maybe doing a bunch of stuff get to tell you that that wasn't their intent, right? After you told them how terrible the effect was on you, right? Because they didn't get a chance to say, that wasn't what I intended to do before you misery dumped on them. And after you've done that, after you've told them how terrible it was, why in God's name would anybody bother telling you what they actually intended? You've made what they did sound terrible. Why would you care? Right? That's the problem with pulling these accusations by way of explanations, especially I know that's not what you said, but it's what I thought of variety, right? When somebody pulls that on me, that's it. Even if the person cares about my feelings in the abstract, they're not in a place where they can hear anyone else's feelings because they're completely caught up in a death battle with their own. The reality is that the people around a chronic overexplainer tend to end up feeling like their motivations don't matter. Their reasons don't matter. Their feelings don't matter. So much energy is put into placating the overexplainer into temporary stability. And then, of course, the overexplainer starts saying things like, I'm being annoying, or I'm being a burden, or I can't do anything right. And I know when I get in places like that, that is not a good place, right? I'm going to say this because hearing it is going to hurt too much territory. Somebody who's saying that is probably not capable of hearing, well, if you really believe that, do things differently, even though, well, that's logical, right? These aren't logical moments. The minute someone starts beating themselves up like that, they're in an unhealthy spiral and nothing else is going to get resolved, right? We'd all love to be unending wells of strength, unending wells of support in those moments. But let's face it, when someone has just told you that you accidentally are the reason they're having a complete freak out meltdown, you made them even though you totally didn't mean to, well, you don't exactly feel like you're an appropriate source of support for that person, because what if you do it again by not meaning to? That's a rational response. And often people who are doing this, I cried so much. I know you didn't mean to, but you made me cry. They're looking for a reassurance. And that is exactly the wrong way to get it. Because people were like, well, if I made you cry for that much and I didn't mean to, I'm not going to say anything more. I don't want to make it worse. So when are explanations appropriate instead of too much? I'll get to those after our final break. Delayed gratification, right? Just let it ride. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website, at nottherapyshow on social media. When we come back, how overexplaining might be wrecking your relationships on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and we're still talking about how over-explaining could be ruining your relationships. And as promised, I'm going to talk about when it's okay to explain. And I'm hesitant to do this because I find that chronic explainers, the minute the okay to explain thing happens, it immediately resets to, let me explain instantly and all the time. Precisely because this is a compulsion. So, the way I figured to do, okay, how can I do practical advice here, right? Here's a checklist. Here's some things. Check in with yourself before you start explaining. Can I name what I'm feeling? If yes, start there. Don't proceed. Just say what you're feeling. Am I naming that feeling without telling myself a negative story about that feeling? If yeah, proceed. If you're going, oh my God, I'm so afraid and I'm so annoying, I'm such a burden. Like, no, it's okay to be afraid. Everybody's afraid sometimes. Can you open your mouth to express that feeling without going further than that? Can you say, I am scared, I am sad, I am angry, without saying you made me or some version of that? All right? How can I express what I'm saying as quickly and simply as possible? You know, I'm frightened because this is going too fast. Not, when you said this, and I said this, and you said this, and I said this, and then you did that, and I said this, and then you said that, and you said that, that made me afraid. Just cut to the chase. The important piece of information there for a person who cares about you is the very last thing you said. And by that point, they're lost. Does the person I'm speaking to seem upset? Like, do they seem agitated? Do they seem worried? Right? Perhaps empathizing, perhaps, checking in with their feelings first is a more effective strategy to keep things on an even keel than panicked explaining. The next one is really important. I've touched on it in the show before about you might be doing this, but if, no, do I have enough information to know what needs to be explained? That person who was like, you not maybe intending to be passive aggressive, but how about finding out? Right? Simple, but for some people, not easy because they really want to say how that suspicion made them feel. Right? And that's why this next thing is important. What is my overall anxiety level? If it's high, probably not making the best decisions, right? And is that anxiety about the present, the past, or some overall personal insecurities? When I realize something is hitting my insecurities, I slow right down. And every communication becomes, what is my intent in what I am saying? This is critical for people with trauma, right? For people with trauma, you can't expect a particular outcome. You can hope for it, but you can't bet your sanity on being able to control another person's responses. And when you are traumatized because it was a scary environment, you do try to control the other person's responses or feelings. It's not the same as being considerate. Because being considerate is you notice the other person had a bad reaction, you stop, you find out why before proceeding. A trauma response is someone has a bad reaction, or even just one you can't read really well. Freak out, 5-alarm fire, all the Inside Out characters running around in your brain screaming, right? Like, there's a difference. And one of the best things that helped me get out of the trauma symptoms was, am I trying to control the other person or response's feelings here? Sometimes you just have to let go and recognize people have the right to be angry with you. They don't have the right to do anything they want to you because they're angry. Now, if you've gone through this checklist and you still feel like you can proceed, keep your explanations as short as possible. Like I said off the top, I keep my emails to 4 or 5 sentences because that's pretty much all anybody absorbs now. 1 sentence in a tense situation. 1 sentence, Okay so far? Can I continue? Another. Slower is better. And keep an eye on the person you're talking to for signs of distress. And if they say what you're laying on them is too much for them at the moment, for God's sakes, please don't get upset with them for that. Because let's face it, that is exactly what you're likely afraid of there. Is the person's going to, not be able to handle it. You can't handle it, right? That's the thing. You see how my emotions and the other person's bled into each other there? I got confused. Who was the one feeling what? Emotional conversations get overwhelming fast. And often, the best thing to do in a difficult conversation is the last thing people think about doing. Affirm that you care for the other person. If you need to hear they care about you, ask for that. Just ask for affirmations instead of spewing blame. Now, if the person can't do it, well, that's a sign that they may have some work to do themselves. But really just asking for what you need, getting to the core of what you're scared of, getting to the core of that feeling. Feelings are simple. It's one word, right? That's so much more balanced and probably is going to be more successful than telling a whole story that risks transferring blame and shame, transferring it to the other person instead of reducing it in yourself. In short, don't start talking until you know why you're about to talk. And I'm explaining isn't enough of a reason to start talking. Why are you explaining? What is the goal? What is the need? It's much better to go, look, I need some reassurance right now. I need a minute. I need you to tell me you don't think I'm crap. Yeah, sure, these are vulnerable, but they're honest. And for a person who does care about you in a non-abusive way, that's really the best course to getting your emotional needs met. And often, those lengthy explanations are just about an unmet need. So figure out what that is as I try to say the word met instead of net again. But I'm out of time and my mouth has stopped working. So questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com, at nottherapyshow.com, at nottherapyshow on social media. If you need more information about maybe where to start, maybe to clarify certain points, please feel free to drop me an email. It's much better than sitting there second guessing everything, stewing, wondering what I coulda, shoulda, whatever, right? Just reach out. It's okay to ask for help. It's good to ask for help. It's smart to ask for help. Or even just a sanity check. Or a good crazy check. Yeah, a good crazy check. Because you know how I close every show. You know what's coming. Your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Talk next time.